Okay, hi. Today we will talk about Kenneth Waltz. We are group two. So first, I will talk about Kenneth Waltz's background. Uh, Kenneth Waltz, Kenneth Waltz was born in 1924 in Ann Arbor, Michigan. He drafted into the U.S. Army during World War II and served again in the Korean War. After graduating from Oberlin College in 1948 with a degree in economics, he obtained a PhD in political science from Columbia University in 1957. So he known for Men, the State and War, initial contribution to international relations and neorealism.
So, for the concept of power, realism believe that power are really important, as how the Thomas Hobbes ideas on state of nature, which is he said that uh, interacting in anarchy only focus on ensuring their own survival and locked in a nasty brutish and short state of war against one another. And I also want to mention another one figure, Niccolo Machiavelli. He portrayed in his books The Prince on how the state should behave and how the state should maintain the power, which is the realism stress about power. Power are really important in acting to the system. And of course the human nature. How does the state act or behave as how the human nature act and behave. What next? And on top of the sub uh, realism, there will be a neorealism or a structure realism, which been uh, introduced by Waltz. Human nature is absolute structure become more important within neorealism. Ergo, structure realism, all states are constrained by existing in an international anarchy system. There is no higher authority in the international realm. States do not have to be responsible to anything else. For this, the stress there is firstly they will stress the international system ordering is principle is anarchy. This means there is no such thing as a world government. There is no higher authority above the main unit that exists in the system itself. And the secondly, neorealism also uh, def- define the principle of the structure of international politics is the distributing of capability across the units inhabiting the international system. Right.
New realism is having two different factions. One is defensive, another is offensive. The offensive realism seeks power and influence to achieve security through domination and hegemony, which means either there will be one nation, which will be the global power, or a social group that is controlling all the power. But defensive realism, in contrast, does it argues that the inner structure of the international system encourages states to maintain moderate and reserved policies to attain security. Defensive realism asserts that aggressive expansion, as promoted by offensive realists, upsets the tendency of states to conform to the balance of power theory, thereby decreasing the primary objective of the state, which they argue is ensuring its security. Now, in defensive realism, is totally opposite of offensive realism. In defensive realism, the primary goal is to maintain a balance of power between the states. If the states don't maintain the balance of the mutual agreement between them, so there will be the situation will be anarchic. The states will be involved in conflict against each other. For example, if we look for the Cold War era between the US and the Soviet Russia, US and Soviet Russia both were militarily have that military to go on war with against each other, but both of them knew the war could destroy whatever they have built and their economy as well. So instead of attacking each other or going into a direct conflict, uh, they intend to increase their capacity of military strength and besides their presence in other regions, especially in the Asia or the Middle East. That's all.
All right. So I'll be providing a critique towards neorealism in particular, and especially why the argument against neorealism, why it's becoming less relevant. So one of the major critique towards neorealism is the rising of open market and economic importance through multilateral and bilateral relations. So an example of this can be seen in free trade agreements. So for example, NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement, or the TPPA, for example. These are examples of how states maintain a better multilateral and bilateral relation. Because in realism in particular, especially when we argue about neorealism as well, oftentimes talks about power as the absolute unit into states, right? Into the ability of states to ensure survival. We think that a counterintuitive argument towards this looks like how liberalism argues against this through multilateral cooperation. This means making money does not only mean is always like in a certain extent better than survival, and like it's quite important to your survival also. So the second part of this also is the, as we can see within status quo, more formation of international cooperation and increased relations through formation of blocs and international organizations. So an example of this can be seen in, for example, the increased participation into United Nations. So states no longer think of individual power as the end all be all, or like blocks within, for example, the ASEAN bloc, for example, the European Union, for example. These are international blocks which exist to go so against like the whole idea of realism in particular, which argues that at the end of the day, survival is more important. So we tell you that there's an ability for you to work together. And thirdly, I think, and this is quite unique in particular, is the overlap of national interests. Because reality is a lot of states have an overlap of national interests. So in neorealism, it argues that national interests oftentimes can only be pursued by the power, by having power. Means if you don't have power, you aren't able to chase your national interests. So we think that because of the existence of overlap, and because different states oftentimes chase the same things within the international sphere, there's an overlap and people work together to solve national interests in particular. So lastly, I think this is like probably the most important is the reducing relevancy of war. The reality is because of how states react to the idea of war and how destructive war has become as technology advances more and more further, and how national interest is more threatened through an increased likeliness of war than a reduction of war. Therefore, war becomes less relevant in this in the view of a realist, right? Because war becomes much more less efficient. You lose more than you're able to gain through that. Therefore, military power becomes less relevant in that context. I think for those reasons, those are my critiques.
Okay, so for conclusion, all right, there can never be a final conclusion of which theory is the most accurate, all right? Cannot say realism is accurate, cannot say liberalism is also accurate, all right? So for Kenneth Wolf's contribution towards international relation is quite pivotal to the branch of realisms and IR international relation as a whole, all right? So to be honest, for Waltz, IR is just a structure of anarchy, right? It's like the anarchy for Waltz, anarchy refers to the absence of a higher authority, all right, within the international dispute, all right. Simply we put, in world politics is anarchy because there's no world government, all right. Then world politics is also categorized by an unequal distribution of power by the capacity of the most powerful states to impose the world order with their own interests, all right? And also the key factor of international relation also is basically dominated by one, two, or many superpowers like unipolarity, bipolarity, multipolarity, and respectively. Sorry, guys. And then the last one is defensive neoliberalism is still relevant in IR, proven in several instances such as the mutual assured destruction theories. In For Waltz attempts to understand the impact of nuclear weapons on international politics, where he emphasized their effort, all right, the country that have nuclear weapon coexistence peacefully because of the abundant prospect of retaliations, all right. So for Waltz, he held that nuclear proliferations does not threaten, but on the contrary, world peace, provided that nuclear stocks are controlled by the governments. All right. So for Waltz, conclusion again, for Waltz, most interesting part about the empirical dimension of international relations, where he also held a very controversial position on U.S. foreign policy, where there's no checks and balance exists in the world policy. That he also argued that the great power are almost certain to abuse their power, often to use against their own interests. So yeah, I think that's all from us. Thank you.